And so, yes, it is very dangerous and we can do stupid things with it. But again, AI is not the danger. Humans doing something stupid with AI is the danger. And this is
Yeah.
why I always go back to it's not AI doing it. Humans are doing things with a new toy that they got.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we have to be careful how we use it because, yeah, that is a very big danger. And if you look at large language models specifically, they are really good at one thing, right?
Mm.
Writing one word at a time, because that's exactly how they were trained. They were given
Mm.
sentences with one word corrupted, and they would guess which word is missing. That's the entire training process. And
Mm.
so they've become really good at writing one word at a time. So you want text written based on facts that you verified yourself? Amazing tool. Go with it all the way. It will be better than humans eventually. But you want to ask it what is true in the world? Good luck.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi, everybody. This is Mark Verbenkov, and welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. This is episode number 145. So today's episode, we are going to be again looking at artificial intelligence, but specifically the intersection with news and fake news. So we're going to be looking at the timely issue connected to this of misinformation and how it's impacting our digital world. And we discuss also the kind of profound impact that misinformation has across the various aspects of society, like politics to public health. So our focus is going to be, of course, on the transformative role of AI and how it's going to be impacting this space, namely in creating a safer and more accurate media landscape. So I'm joined today by Alex Fink. He is the CEO of Otherweb, and this is a news platform that has about 7 million active monthly users on it. And it's focused just on this. It's creating a junk-free news space, and it uses AI to filter out misinformation and ensures that only credible news reaches its audience. So we explore the ways that AI is used to sift through this noise and present clear, reliable content. We'll also touch on how these advancements affect user engagement, also the job landscape in tech, and what, of course, the future holds for artificial intelligence in media. So this conversation really is essentially for anyone interested in the intersection of technology, media, and the truth. So about Alex Fink. He is the founder and CEO of Otherweb. Prior to founding Otherweb, Alex had a significant career in computer vision and perception systems, which influenced his commitment to improving the quality of information on the internet. This commitment led him to create Otherweb with the mission to combat misinformation and enhance the way people consume news by using advanced AI technologies. Alex is also known for his entrepreneurial spirit, having co-founded Swarmer, which is a startup in military technology that specializes in software for managing drone swarm missions. Great. Well, hi there, Alex. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today. It's great to have you here to talk again about artificial intelligence, which is the thing that everybody's talking about, still is. But yeah, it's always great to have more people talk about AI, and in this case, specifically media and misinformation. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Those are my favorite topics.
Yeah. But before we get into like the content, like the interesting meat and bones of AI and media, what initially got you interested in this journey that you're on? So like, was there a thing that brought media and AI together, or were they kind of already different and separate things that you were interested in?
Those were two parallel tracks that kind of collided at some point. So I think on the media side, I was born in the Soviet Union, and I kind of remember what it was like to be in a society where nobody knows what's going on, right?
Right.
Everybody's consuming propaganda all day. Everybody believes things that are nonsensical. They're pretty sure those things are nonsensical, but they're not 100% sure. And so it's a really odd experience to be in. And I remember my parents would wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning, lock themselves in the closet and listen to Voice of America just to get something informative in their lives. And obviously, it's not perfect information, it's foreign propaganda, but it was something. And
Yeah.
it allowed us to leave a few months before war broke out in our hometown. And so obviously that informational advantage led to good actions. So I have this imprinted in my mind. If you know stuff, maybe you'll act better. Now, completely in parallel to that, for the first 15 years of my career, I was building perception systems, video cameras, computer vision, that sort of thing. That's my exposure to AI, but it has nothing to do with news. At some point, I had this crisis of conscience on the camera side that I think the world doesn't need more cameras. Why am I doing this? I'm not contributing. And that collided with the thought that, oh, and by the way, people around me are consuming junk all day. They don't have the same advantage we had of knowing what's going on. Why don't I switch to working on something more useful? And that's where I am.
It's a perfect blend of historical and I guess like modern experiences. I haven't had somebody that's born in the Soviet Union before, but I think that's like a very poignant thing to have experienced and a perfect reason why, I mean, you would be interested in media for sure.
Yep.
I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about misinformation and junk news. Maybe, I mean, misinformation, I think it's a reasonably new term. I mean, maybe it's an old term, but it's like new in the zeitgeist, right? In the popular consciousness of people. Do you want to just define or how you define misinformation and junk news so that we have a starting point to move into the conversation with?
So let's start from the older terms. Disinformation is a term
Yeah.
that we've had for a long time, and that's when somebody tells you things that are not true on purpose to mislead you. Right? And misinformation is this newer term that we got around 2016, which basically means things that are misleading you, even if they were not created with the intention of doing that, right? And so that includes a lot of things that were perhaps created as clickbait and not as something meant to disinform, right? 2016 is a perfect example because I think the most shared article on Facebook that year was the Pope endorses Donald Trump. That one got more than 800,000 shares, right? And that wasn't created by GRU agents somewhere. It was created by some Macedonian kids that were just making a lot of money with advertising, right?
Right.
But that is a perfect example of something that isn't disinforming you, but it is misinforming you. Now, of course, there's a problem here of what is true, what is not, how can you tell? If it's unintentional, then it's much harder than if you know a foreign government did this. But that's where we are. And now there's this term that I prefer and that I use quite a bit, which is junk. Things that were created just with the intention of monetizing them. And then it doesn't matter if they happen to be true or not. It's just low quality content, right? To the extent that it's true, it's accidental. It's not a part of why it was created. Therefore, you just can't rely on it, right? If I tell you something like the moon is 1/6 of the size of the earth because it's made of cheese, right? Okay, I happen to tell you something that is true, but for the wrong reason, right? And so I think the reason here matters much more, and the quality of how I lay out the argument with the references and things like that is much more important than did I happen to be right.
Very interesting. And I guess with the explosion of social media and just online content in general, the amount of junk news and junk information has also exploded. It's gone in parallel in that sense. I mean, you alluded to 2016. Not to use that as an example, but like there were a lot of challenges in trying to fight a lot of this junk news or misinformation or malinformation, disinformation at the time. And I think the way I want to structure this is before we start talking about AI, which is, I think, going to change the game or expand or exponentially grow the game a little bit. What were some of the challenges before AI came around or in the past of dealing with this junk news, as you put it?
So I actually don't look at AI as a source of this problem because it predates AI, right?
Yeah.
So I think if I can date the moment at which things start exploding in the wrong direction, it's actually right around 2003 when Google acquired AdSense and we started getting perfect tracking for how ads are performing. Because now if content is monetized through ads and ads pay per click or per view, then you have a selective pressure on all content to basically become clickbait over time.
Really
right?
interesting.
And that selective pressure is, in some sense, stronger than the intentions of the people involved, right? You have people with good intentions, people with bad intentions. It doesn't matter. Over time, clickbait wins because that's what people pay for, essentially.
Mhm.
I think that was the source of when these curves kind of started diverging. And then now, obviously, it's becoming worse just because content is cheaper to create with AI. But essentially, all AI is doing here is lowering the cost of production. It's not really creating a new selective pressure. It's just making it even easier to create more junk that can still be optimized for the same things that humans were optimizing 10 years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting. And like, for instance, in the States, I think they had a like I can't remember if it was like a department or a ministry, or there was like some public entity that was created to deal with misinformation. Um, I haven't kept track of that. Do you know if that was successful at all? I mean, maybe it's not because it's still around so much, but there have been these larger public or organized attempts to try and stop this. What's your perspective on that? Is that a losing battle, like a pointless effort, or are those
Well,
things actually bringing about some benefit?
yeah, it's slightly worse than pointless, I would say, because there is always the danger that even if the people you hire to lead that department now are benevolent and
Mm.
do a good job, the people who will replace them in 20 years will turn us back into the Soviet Union. So I
Right,
think
right,
I
right.
have this perspective here, which is I don't actually want the government to tell us what is true information and what is
Yeah.
misinformation. That tends to end badly. Now, that department that you alluded to, I think it was basically left out of the room, right? It
Hmm.
didn't do
Yeah.
anything, and people just complained about it for a little bit, and that's it. It went away.
Hmm.
But the more nefarious thing that you saw here in the US was that the FBI had 80 people in San Francisco that were basically sending takedown requests to a bunch of private companies for everything
Hmm.
they thought was misinformation,
Yeah.
which is kind of questionable on First Amendment grounds, I would say. And it's also questionable whether we need the FBI to be doing this, right? We certainly want to know which information is bad or not, but I'm not sure that law enforcement is the right place to make that decision. And I'm
Hmm.
not sure that hiding behind private companies as law enforcement agents essentially eliminate things from the information sphere
Hmm.
is probably not the right setup we want to have going forward.
Yeah, I would highly agree with that. I read 1984 at a young age, followed by Brave New World, and I think there's a correct me if I'm wrong. You might know. I think there's a Russian author that wrote We, which is in the same kind of dystopian, um, futuresque world. But 1984, I mean, I'm always thinking about the Ministry of Truth whenever these kinds of conversations of misinformation and media come up. But I guess that's one of the main questions that comes up all the time is like, who defines what information is truthful and misinformation or malinformation, junk news, because those the whether it's a public entity or an intelligence agency or even individuals. I mean, those that have the power to categorize this information as the truthful information and this is the nonsense information, I think has a significant amount of power and leverage over a population to make them move in a certain way, as you alluded to with your parents getting correct information ahead of time and then making a proper decision. So it's I don't know how you want to respond to that.
Well, I want to respond to a few things because,
Yeah.
first of all, you mentioned the word malinformation a
Yeah,
couple of
yeah,
times now, and,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we've never defined that.
yeah, true.
So, as far as I understand, malinformation is information that is true but leads to undesirable behavior.
Mhm.
Right? Let me know if your understanding is different because that
Yeah.
term just appeared this year, as far as I
Yeah,
know, on the
yeah,
scene.
yeah. I've
Um,
listened to too many podcasts that use it, and I don't fully understand it, but it's more my
yeah,
lexicon now
yeah.
than
But
misinformation. Yeah,
misinformation is
yeah,
untrue and leads you to
yeah,
believe the wrong things, and malinformation is true but leads you to believe in the wrong things. And
yeah.
I think I don't know, the best example I can come up with is if people keep showing you more and more instances where a vaccine was dangerous,
Mm.
you might conclude that vaccines are more dangerous than being unvaccinated, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas
Hmm.
in reality, yes, there is information of cases where vaccines were dangerous, but no, on average, they're not more
They're not
dangerous
right.
than the alternative, right? And so it's giving you the truth, but not the entire truth, and therefore misleading you. That's at least how I understand. Now, going back to who should determine what is true, I think we only have one method that really works well, and it doesn't involve any centralized authorities, right? In fact, I would kind of suggest that people read Jonathan Rauch and the Constitution of Knowledge. That probably is the best book that describes it, which basically describes this process for determining true information from random junk as the social process in which we all check each other's work, and over time things that are more likely to be true kind of bubble up to the top, right? But at no point is there a scientist that says, here's what the science says, right? The way science works, or at least the way it's supposed to work, is everybody publishes studies. Those studies get peer reviewed and sometimes torn to shreds during peer review. Those studies get shown to various editors and sometimes torn to shreds by editors. And then they get published if they didn't get torn to shreds at this process. But then next year, somebody intentionally creates a study to try to disprove yours.
Right.
Right. And so if you have this process where everybody tries to adjust what others have said, over time, you discover some things that stood the test of time and weren't torn to shreds yet. That's how we know to determine what is true and what is not over time. I don't think there's a shortcut here. Now, the problem is that if now we are creating information much faster than we were before, this process doesn't scale unless we also automate the testing part somehow. So this is what I've been trying to do, just use AI to accelerate what humans do really well anyway. Right? Just because we can't scale an editor to go through 10,000 articles, an editor can do maybe 200 per day. Okay, let's make an AI that basically automates the work of an editor and is 97% as good. Right? I'm not trying to create a new process or a new arbiter of truth. I'm just trying to accelerate what people have been doing already.
Very interesting. But one other question before we jump into Otherweb, and this has come up on the podcast a lot of times. It's the biases that are implicit in these AI models. Most, I guess, infamously, was it a month or two ago? There was Google's, I'm forgetting the name of their AI, but you would ask it to generate or populate a number of images, and it like refused. Just it was impossible to generate images of like white males. So, and that's just one example of many. There's always bias.
They have a worse one from 2 days ago.
Oh no!
Apparently, if you ask Gemini or Google's voice assistant, which uses Gemini under the hood, what is the Holocaust or how many Jews died in the Holocaust, it would refuse to answer.
Really?
If you asked it what the Nakba was, it gave you the full definition according to Wikipedia. But any question regarding the Holocaust, it just pretended to not understand you.
Crazy.
So I think the black Nazis from a month ago are old news already.
Right. And that's the speed of this space and why there's so much hype around it, right? It's fascinating. So I wanted to bring this up, not because it's a critique to you. I think it's just like in the public consciousness, and people that are listening to these kinds of podcasts are aware of these sorts of things. So like if you're talking about accelerating that social experiment, or not experiment, but the social process of defining what is true through AI, the relevant question is, well, how do we solve, or how do we hold back those kind of biases that seem to be implicit in not all, but a lot of these AI tools that are coming out?
I'll give you a cheeky answer and then a slightly more practical one.
Perfect.
The cheeky answer is that human editors have biases too.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, it's kind of hard to dissect their brain and figure out why they did a particular thing. And so those biases are sometimes hidden. Sometimes they may not even be aware that they exist, etc. So bias has always been a problem. And now we're just seeing that because we're creating models that are used by millions of people at the same time. And therefore, we're discovering these biases faster than we could with a New York Times editor. Right. It could take us decades to discover that the New York Times editor actually has a hidden agenda. But here, 3 days, and suddenly we know that Gemini denies the Holocaust. Right. So that's one problem. But I guess my bigger answer is to say that the people who develop this AI and the people who decide whether to use it or not have to be very cautious and have to take precautions that perhaps human editors didn't take before. Right. What we've done is we've opened the source of all our curation models and the data sets that we use to train them. right? So that people can at least see what's in there, what we trained them on.
Mm.
If there's an obvious bias there, I actually announced at some point I'll give $1,000 to anybody who points out
nice.
an instance in which one of our models is biased,
Yeah.
right? Because I actually want them to do that so I can fix it, right? We've also registered ourselves as a public benefit corporation so that we can put a particular mission as something binding in our incorporation docs. And in our case, the mission is improving the quality of information people consume, right? That is an attempt to bind our future selves so that if at some future point we have a trade-off between making money and informing people properly, then we will not just be bound by law to pick making money, which is what every C Corp is bound to do, right?
Right.
Prioritize shareholder value above everything else. We want to have the option to at least select between the two or balance the two out in some way. So I don't know if those are enough. It's just the attempts that we could come up with. But I think we should start holding companies that roll out these things to higher standards and demand them to open the code, to open the data sets, to register themselves in a certain way that actually makes them legally liable if they do the wrong thing. And again, there is the potential here to create something that is better than humans, because with humans, the biases are hidden. Here, there is a chance that we can avoid that. But there is also the potential to create something substantially worse than humans. And so it's kind of up to us which way we go.
Yeah, and that's just the reason that I was asking those questions at the beginning, because I've gotten a lot of feedback from audience members when these sorts of ideas have come up on the podcast before, and it's also talked about in I guess the general online communities, that there's this great fear of creating something that will be, as you said, substantially worse than what we have now. But I'm happy to hear that you've clearly already thought about these sorts of things and put in place some ways of stopping that from coming forward.
We're constantly thinking about it. Doesn't mean that our solutions are perfect, right? So if anybody has additional ideas, please email me. I'm interested.
Right. Awesome. Well, I guess with that, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about exactly what you guys are doing. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit a little bit earlier, but if we could just dive into what exactly Otherweb is doing, I think it'd be a great conversation.
So let's start from what we've done so far, and then we can talk about crazy things that are to come. What we've initially done, starting from about 18 months ago, is we created a suite of models that just evaluates content quality. And the way we do that is just detect bad traits that everybody can agree are bad, like clickbait headlines, right? We detect all the bad stuff that we know how to detect. And then we score content as basically 100 minus all the penalties for the bad stuff we detect. Right. This way, there's no bias or things that people can disagree on. We don't try to just come up with a score by looking at something, figuring out if it's good or not. We're just doing what every peer editor does and criticize stuff based on specific things we find. Right. Based on these models, we created apps for Android and iOS and for the web. And there's a widget that people can embed in their own website as well that basically aggregate content and create a newsfeed that the user configures themselves of what do they want to consume and which order based on the outputs of these models that everybody can see. That's what was true up until 2 months ago. And then 2 months ago, we rolled out what we call the news concierge, which is this chatbot that you can now ask to customize a news report to you, and it kind of replaces the need for a feed. So instead of going through a feed and seeing dozens of articles and selecting which ones you want to read, you just ask the concierge, tell me what's new in AI research over the past 2 weeks, but don't mention OpenAI. I've already read about them. And it will create a news report based on what you asked. So we think this is the next step. It replaces feeds and search engines and all of that other good stuff. And of course, at the end, we still include citations with links to all the source articles. So people read 2 sentences that came from a particular article. They can click on it just like on Wikipedia, and then go and read the source and see the ads on the source website, right? So it's still within fair use guidelines. And then what we think is going to happen in the crazy future that is to come is that it's not clear to me that writing should be a part of a journalist's work anymore.
Writing.
Right?
Yeah.
Writing.
Okay.
Right? Because journalists are doing 2 different jobs, essentially. They're a PI, and then they are a writer. Right? They find good information to write about by talking to people, by interviewing, by filing FOIA requests, by doing all these things, right? And then they have to write about them. And it's really hard to find people with those 2 skill sets where they intersect in the same person. But AI is becoming very good at writing. It is terrible at doing the job of a PI. So I can see a future in which journalists are just amazing PIs, and all the writing, because it's free, is done by AI and is completely customized to the reader. It doesn't even have to write an article that is seen by 1,000 people. Every article can have a target audience of exactly one person, and it will use the language that you understand the best. It will kind of customize the length to your attention span, things like that, right? The facts will be the same, but the writing doesn't have to be the same for everyone. So this is what I suspect is coming. I'm not sure journalists will enjoy hearing that because they are very proud of being really good writers, but they are no longer the only good writers on the planet. And that might be a problem for them. I think it, again, gives us an opportunity to create a more transparent chain that basically connects facts to readers without many people with biases in between touching this information and potentially injecting those biases into what people consume. But let's see how this plays out.
Yeah, super interesting. I think this also touches on like the wider trend. I've talked about like video content, for instance, right? And the future of these generative AI models creating highly personalized and customized video for people to consume. Now, we're still maybe a couple of years away from this, and Hollywood's going to get massively impacted by this. I guess it's a similar trend in most of these industries where content is created. You have no longer do you need to create like a TV show for a massive demographic. You can make it highly personalized to this one person, and it sounds like news is going to turn into that as well. I watched a TED Talk many years ago, and it was about filter bubbles. It was about these. You're probably more aware of this than I am, but it's about these bubbles of information that people get sucked into because there's just so much information online, and you're only consuming, say, if you're like a conservative, you're only consuming conservative talking points and ideas, and you're never like expanding outside of your bubble into like liberal talking points or otherwise. Do you think, or do you have a fear or a concern that even though, and it does sound amazing, I'm not knocking Otherweb whatsoever, the kind of personalized news for people that are just typing, say, give me conservative news in the last 24 hours, that these kind of filter bubbles might be expanded or the filter bubble, I don't know how to describe it, might be hardened, right? Like the filter bubbles might become more substantial for people.
Well, I think the pessimistic answer is it's going to happen with Otherweb or without it.
Yeah.
Right. Just the technology makes it inevitable because if the cost of creating content is zero, then there's absolutely no reason for you to consume content that was created for many people. You will want to consume content that was created just for you. And now the question is this done in a way that benefits you, or is this done in a way that extracts the most attention out of you, which is what most social media companies are doing with their attention-oriented algorithms, right? And so we're trying to do it in a way that tries to separate. Let's say you like something, right? And let's say you like an article that says Trump was indicted for political corruption. Okay, did you like that because you're interested in the topic of political corruption or because you dislike Trump? I want to know the difference because I want to customize your feed based on the former and not the latter. What YouTube and TikTok and all the others are going to do is probably customize it without caring which one it is, right? If you like it, you're more likely to spend more time on it and share it. Therefore, let's just go with whatever it is you like. And they are much more likely to create a bubble for you based on you not liking Trump, for instance. By the way, I don't know if you do or not. I'm just using that
Canadian.
as an
It's irrelevant.
Okay, you have your own problems. I'll put it this way.
Yeah.
But that's the idea. We're trying to separate this. We're trying to emphasize to people that don't tell us whether you like this. Tell us whether this is interesting.
Right.
Because liking is the wrong level for us. We don't want to customize your feed based on that. But ultimately, there's a danger that customization will be done based on the wrong parameters. And you can try to change this and see what happens, right? So interesting, not interesting is a good way to customize things. Use of specific vocabulary seems like a good way to customize things. As somebody for whom English is a third language, I can attest to that, right? It would be much easier if there was a certain vocabulary used for me based on how I learned English, because I learned it mostly by reading it, right? And so maybe I don't understand slang as well. But on the other hand, maybe I think some words are normal, but everybody stopped using them in the 19th century.
Sure.
So those are all good ways to customize. And then customizing based on, do you like this person? No? Okay, I'll give you all the articles that are negative towards that person. That's a bad way to customize content. I hope fewer companies will do that.
Very interesting. So you have, I think, around 7 million users on the platform.
It's growing, north of 9 now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
What's some of the feedback that some of these users have been given? Like, I'm assuming there's so many people, so they like it. Maybe specifically to this filter bubble idea, are they finding value? Are they, and maybe this can go into another bit of a conversation here. Is a divide growing, or are they finding like their political views are strengthening and they're more against another side? Because that seems to be a big part of culture, right? There's this schism between counter sides that wasn't there maybe even 15 years ago as much.
So this is the point where I have to take us back to, there's what exists now and what I described as a crazy future, right? What exists now is a feed where we aggregate things from more than 900 different sources that include both right and left. It's basically everything from Breitbart to Mother Jones, right?
Gotcha.
We don't go farther than those extremes, but everything in
good
between
extremes.
Everything in between is fair game, especially in the punditry section, which is not strictly news, and therefore you could have strong opinions there. So we make it really hard for people to disable one of those two sides. Right? And so, like, yes, you could go and disable 450 outlets, right? but there's no one button that says eliminate everything left wing. We didn't create that button on purpose. And by the way, we also didn't add a classifier to the articles that says whether they are right wing or left wing. Even though we developed that model, we put it on our Hugging Face for people to see. And then we decided not to use it inside the Otherweb, because it seemed like the only way it will be used is to filter out stuff that is from the other side. And that's probably not something we want to introduce into the world. So what we see in general is that our audience is pretty balanced, right? Among other things, from time to time, I will see people delete the app and write me an angry email. And I get an equal number of those from the right and the left, right?
Good.
I would get the occasional angry email saying, why do you have all this fake news? Where's OAN and Newsmax, right? And then occasionally I will have an email that says, I got 2 Fox News articles in a row. This is right-wing garbage, right? And I'm happy to see both of those as long as they are balanced, because those are people, well, they're probably not our audience, right? Our audience, I would say, consists of some number of people like me who are just information junkies, right? Speed readers who want to read hundreds of items per day. And we make it easier for them because everything has a bullet point summary. So they can skim through hundreds of items and then only dive deeper into the ones they really want to dive deeper into. But it also includes a lot of people who just stopped consuming the news altogether a couple of years ago. And they're willing to come back using this tool because they don't get all the emotional baggage, right? They get some set of facts of what happened without getting outraged or depressed or any of the other stuff that the news does to you. And so I think that's actually, most of our engineers are in this category and most of our advisors are in this category. They don't consume news themselves. I have to tell them what happened from time to time because I can't not consume it.
Right. Well, very interesting. I'm super busy right now, but I think you sold me on Otherweb, so I'll have to sign up at some point in the near future. For me, I lived in Barcelona for 7 years. So I was out of the political understandings because everything was in Spanish and my Spanish wasn't good enough. But coming back to Canada, being so close to the Canadian border, to the US border, it's like all of these political pundits and the different sides is like back in my face all the time now. And I'm not just talking about myself, but like it's really interesting and maybe a little bit sad to see the schism between the right and left in both of these countries growing, right? There's a more of a divide that's happening. And I think as you mentioned earlier on, it's a lot of the media that's being pushed, these filter bubbles, as I call it, being a little bit more stabilized, that's creating the schism. So it to me, it sounds like you may have figured out a way to help that not increase, the schism increase, because I think it's very
just bear in
detrimental
mind,
to culture. Yeah.
yeah, just bear in mind that we are helping people who want to be helped.
Yeah.
At least
Yeah.
with the existing product, right?
Yeah.
It's a self-selected group of people that wanted to find
Right.
that, and therefore they found it.
Mhm.
I doubt somebody who just wants to listen to Alex Jones shout all day
Yeah.
is going to come to Otherweb and suddenly read both sides in a
Right.
50-50 split.
Right.
So we've kind of limited our audience probably to 20% of the population by doing that. And for everybody else, we'll just have to go onto the production side and help journalists produce better content over
Right.
time.
Right.
Because on the consumption side, we cannot help consumers that didn't choose us.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue. This is one thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit more. It's this idea of technological unemployment, which I focused on a lot in the first 100 episodes of the podcast or so. But the shifting way in which people are working. I talked about video editors, same thing for journalists, which is more relevant for here. How do you see, and you've already touched on this, but how do you see this shifting over the next like 3 years, for instance? I think like ChatGPT, which I use every single day, multiple times a day, is already pretty good at generating articles that I need to write. It's not, I don't think is there yet for like full human compatibility for journalist articles, but you must think that over the next 3, maybe 5 years or so, it's going to happen. And then what are
we have something under the hood that's much better for
okay, excellent.
but yeah, ChatGPT or even the GPT API where you can configure a bit more things, it always gives me the impression of an undergrad student trying to get an A. Right. So it doesn't even matter what prompts you give it. It always writes in this overly sophisticated way with too many commas and too many dependent clauses.
Yes.
It just tries to sound smart, which I guess is what the people who were giving it human feedback during the reinforcement learning phase, that's what they valued because they were students themselves. That's my guess. But anyway, it is possible already to fine-tune models, and we've done it that write as well as human journalists. So it's absolutely going to happen. To your question, I think the best historical analogy that I can think of is probably farming in the 1920s, where in 1920, 30% of the population worked in farming. And by 1930, it was 3% of the population, right? And so you had a lot of people displaced. Most of them actually picked up their things and moved from the south of the US to the north, to the big cities. You still see some of the side effects of this big migration in the US today. So even though it's been 4 generations, we haven't fully recovered. So it's going to be a tough transition. Now, in this case, the people who will likely get displaced are people whose output is words, or maybe soon thereafter, people whose output is audio or video, right? Words come first because low bandwidth, the models are the best at it. It's easier, right? But yeah, the displacement is definitely going to happen, but it will never be 100%. So I know a lot of people are talking about AI model doing X or AI model doing Y. I never think of it that way. I always think of human doing X with these tools, right? And so we used to have, sorry for using history a lot, right? We used to have human computers who would sit down and compute. Then we gave them calculators, so now they would compute a little bit faster, right? Then the computers were displaced, and instead you got programmers who would write machine commands on a punch card, feed that into an electronic computer, who would do the compute, right? So who was producing the work? It was the programmer, right? And then we got software engineers that wouldn't program in machine language, right? They would write something in human legible language that was then translated by a compiler or interpreter into machine language that was then executed on a computer, etc. And so we're just building these additional layers, and now we have the AI layer, which probably means most of the software engineers aren't necessary either, because AI can write software, right? So at some point, we will just be designing flowcharts of how things are supposed to work. And then everything in between will be done by all these layers, including AI. So that's how I tend to think about it. AI will never be responsible for its output.
Yeah.
At some point, a human is legally responsible for whatever was done.
Yeah.
Just like if I file taxes, it doesn't matter that I use TurboTax, I'm liable, right? Sorry, TurboTax.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously one of the big conversations, right? Whether the humans are going to be in the loop in the foreseeable future. I mean, maybe not in like 100 years time, but certainly in the our lifetimes, humans are definitely going to be in the loop. Um, have you thought a little bit more about the impact on journalism in general? I mean, you talked about uh, what was it, the farmers example, right? There's going to be
Yep.
a large migration. I mean, I like the example of the cars as well in the large cities, right? Or from
Yep.
horses to cars. There was over, I think it was about a decade, maybe 2 decades, from having cities just inundated with manure and horses all over the place to vehicles and all the changes that happened there, and then all the like suppliers as well. This is also something that, and maybe this could be my question to you, the peripheral support of journalists. If you look at like the horse and buggy carriage, it wasn't just the driver and the actual um, buggy that was displaced, but it was the wheel maker and it was the the shoe, the horseshoe provider, like all of these
Yep.
peripheral jobs and I guess even industries were kind of they evaporated overnight. Um, Maybe you can touch on that, but focus on the journalistic
Yeah.
aspect of it. Yeah.
I mean, all of these are good parallels. I think farming is slightly closer only as far as the labor force is concerned, right? Because you can define which labor
Right.
force was
Right.
displaced, and it's slightly harder in the car. But the car is actually a great analogy, and that at some point, something that was really valuable and really expensive
Hmm.
gets replaced by a much cheaper, simpler, cleaner alternative. And yes, a lot of industries basically cease to exist as a result because everything they can produce is too expensive and too inefficient.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we're going to see something similar with AI as well. Of course, locally within those industries, it's negative to them. But ultimately, for society as a whole, if you just look at the aggregate, we got the same product cheaper and cleaner.
Yeah.
So it cannot possibly be negative. We just have to live through that transition
Hmm.
without some sort of a revolution. So yeah, we're going to see all of those effects. It's kind of inevitable. Now, with journalism specifically, I think you might also, or I am somewhat worried about the tragedy of the comments to some
Mm.
extent.
Mm.
Because if copying is really easy because an AI agent rewords it and then it's no longer a copy, you're not plagiarizing, right? Then everybody just has an incentive to copy from their neighbor and nobody has an incentive to do the initial work.
Mm.
And so at some point, we're just all copying from each other.
Yeah.
Right. And nobody is doing the actual work of going to the garage to talk to Deep Throat so you can expose Watergate. Right.
Mhm.
Because that doesn't get rewarded if, at least in the past, you got the scoop, you got the Pulitzer Prize, and you got to print it the day before everybody else. And now it's 3 seconds before everybody else, and nobody even remembers who was first because they got more clicks than you did. Right.
Mhm.
And so there's no longer an incentive to be first. And since we're talking about a lot of parallels and analogies, I think the closest parallel to that is basic science,
Mm.
right? Where we have to fund it in some way other than by the revenue of companies, because companies just don't have an incentive to do it most of the time.
Yeah.
They have an incentive to do things for which the science has already been done and just repackage it differently, right? But if we want basic science done, then we fund it using grants and universities and sometimes NGOs and things like that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because we've discovered that there's thing is too disconnected from the end product that is getting monetized. And we might see the same thing in journalists where maybe investigative work will have to be funded in some additional ways because
Mm.
selling that content it's too disconnected from the investigative work, right? You can
Yeah.
sell that content whether or not you're the one who did the investigation. The other option, and I don't quite know how that could be done, but another thing we do with basic science is patents, which we don't have for text, right? For text, we have copyrights that are too narrow because you modify that text a little bit and it's no longer covered by copyright.
Mhm.
But for science, we use patents as well, where a basic idea or a basic structure, as long as it involves a machine or a transformation, as of 2002, can be patented even if somebody implemented it using different words or different specific types of equipment.
Yeah.
So maybe we should think of something like this for investigative journalism as well, where if you uncovered a certain fact pattern, then nobody else is allowed to write about it for 3 days, just
Right.
to give you some sort of a head start where you can monetize it and nobody else can.
Mhm.
Obviously, it shouldn't be 17 years, right? It needs to be 2 days, 3 days, something like that. But if you're thinking about what regulation can improve in this market, that's a few crazy options.
Yeah.
But the problem is going to happen because copying is cheaper than doing the actual investigation.
Yeah. Many ideas from that. I mean, one, it's as you said, it's inevitable, right? This is definitely going to happen. So the entire environment needs to change along with it. And I think we're human beings. It's we're great at change, but we're also horrible at change at the same time. So it'll be very interesting to follow this as time goes on. One of the things that you were talking about reminded me of another conversation I had, and it was regarding the training data of these. I mean, whether they're GPT models or just AI models in general, and how the first couple models obviously had only human generated content to train on. And the concern, this was brought up by one of my guests in the past, was that as time goes on, if more and more and more content on the internet is AI generated, there's going to be less and less human generated content for these models to train on. And it might be similar with these journalists, is that, well, you mentioned it. If there's no incentive for these journalists to actually do the investigative report, it's the whole field might implode, which is what this guy was referring to. You know, GPT-6 might not come about because there's no more human content to train on.
That's the scary part. It will come
Yeah.
about, and it will be
Yeah.
trained on the outputs of GPT-5, which was trained on the outputs of GPT-4. And what will happen, and this concerns me quite a bit, I'm not in the business of making those base models, right? But I hope they are concerned about it too, is that what you're doing here is reinforcing a previous bias.
Yes.
So whatever random bias GPT-3 happened to have is stronger in 3.5 and stronger in 4 and stronger in 5 and stronger in 6, right? Even if it was a random fluctuation, eventually it becomes a secular trend, right? So that concerns me to no end because people will rely on these models more and more.
Yeah.
But these models will actually be less and less reliable if they included model output as their input. So yeah, I hope they're thinking about that. I hope they're thinking of how to label their own output. If you search Google Scholar right now for phrases that only GPT would say, like as of the date of my information cutoff in April 2023, you find hundreds of entries, right? So people filed that as peer-reviewed articles.
I've heard of that. I've heard of that. Yeah, and they get accepted, right? Sometimes they've gotten accepted.
Yeah. And you can bet your ass that GPT-5 is using that as training data.
Sure,
right?
sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess this is one of the many reasons why people are saying like AI, as amazing as it is and how many problems it can solve, it can also be like a civilization ender, right?
Yeah.
It could lead us right off the cliff.
I mean, if somebody gets a gun and they don't know how to use one, they can shoot their own brains off, right? And so yes, it is very dangerous, and we can do stupid things with it. But again, AI is not the danger. Humans doing something stupid with AI is the danger, and this is why I always go back to it's not AI doing it. Humans are doing things with a new toy that they got. And we have to be careful how we use it because that is a very big danger. And if you look at large language models specifically, they are really good at one thing, right? Writing one word at a time, because that's exactly how they were trained. They were given sentences with one word corrupted, and they would guess which word is missing. That's the entire training process. And so they've become really good at writing one word at a time. So you want text written based on facts that you verified yourself? Amazing tool. Go with it all the way. It will be better than humans eventually. But you want to ask it what is true in the world? Good luck.
Yeah. Fascinating idea. I see our time is winding down here. I didn't expect the conversation to go this way, but I'm really happy that it did. Are there any other like within the couple of minutes that we have left, like future visions you have that are maybe a little bit more positive? I mean, I think we've touched on the ones that are very important, but maybe a little bit darker. Maybe to leave the audience with some like more positive outlook on the future of this AI hype wave that we're in.
Well, I would say a few things. First of all, I think once the fog clears out and the hype wave is over, we will find out what AI is actually good at and what has been overhyped, right? So it will be somewhat more limited than what people envision right now, at least in the short term, at least within the current paradigm. And within those things that are limited, if AI is used for the things that it is really good at, then we'll have long-term benefits from that, right? So if AI is good at writing information accurately without injecting bias, because let's say that's how we use it and that's how we train it, we will actually get a less biased information sphere as a result of using it, because humans are extremely biased, right?
Yeah.
And we're seeing humans, that this is what we started from, that for the past 20 years, humans have kind of corrupted the news because of the clickbait incentive. So maybe with AI, it could get better, especially if we create the right incentives in this ecosystem. The same thing will be true in many other industries. I mean, I mentioned to you off the air that I am tangentially involved in the defense industry, right? Well, think about what it would mean if you can fight a war with no warriors.
Yeah.
Like we're doing compute without human computers, right? Why should there be humans on the front lines? It makes no sense, right? So we can save a lot of lives this way. And maybe at some point we'll just realize, but okay, if it's just robots shooting each other, why don't you just negotiate? Okay, I save you 1,000 robots, you save me 1,000 robots.
Right.
Why not?
Right.
The robots will not have the pride of, but I managed to conquer this village and therefore I must, right? So there are a lot of things in which things could be better if we replaced humans with machines that do something better and maybe cleaner in that specific thing. We just have to be very vigilant and always understand it's not the future, it's multiple futures, and we get to determine which ones turn into reality.
Perfect place to end the conversation on, Alex. I'll have your LinkedIn and Otherweb up on the show notes. Are there any other? I mean, you also have a podcast. Maybe you could. I'll have that up on the show notes. Are there any other things that you want to have people reach out to you from?
Yeah, I mean, this is all good. I hope people try out the Otherweb. Email me on alex@otherweb.com if you like it, or if you don't like it, then you definitely should email me and tell me what you don't like about it. And also in general, use other tools. I'm not trying to compete with the ecosystem. Use any other software that you find that helps you select information better, because I want you to be more informed and make better decisions. It's good for everybody.
Perfect. I couldn't agree further. Alex, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and talking about AI and certainly some things I didn't expect to talk about if we were framing it all as a junk news and misinformation discussion. But I'm happy that you came on and that we got these ideas shared. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark.
Great. Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.